This program is brought to you in part by City Winery.
Raymond Khoury, whose latest book is Rasputin's Shadow. Yes. Recently, you've been taking part in an international thriller fest writer book called Face Off, yes, where you were paired with one of my favorite authors, to Linwood Barclay. Yeah. So you started in banking.
No, I graduated from I studied architecture.
So you are actually an architect.
I am an architect.
Oh, you're an architect. Okay. Yeah. You become the architect of a sort of a historical novel.
I first started writing screenplays before I did novels. There was a very similar, there was a parallel in the approach, the structural approach to solving a creative problem that you've given yourself. So you're designing a building, a house, you've got parameters that you have to work in. Screenplays also had that kind of structural, you're creating art, but you have to do it within a structural framework. With novels, it's more free.
So the first novel was The Last Templar, which started as a screenplay. What was intriguing to you about that story?
I think when I started researching the Templars, there was all this legend about, all these myths about them. Yeah, about what did they really, what was their lost treasure?
That's right.
What hold did they have over the Vatican? How did they become so powerful so quickly? And then why were they obliterated so quickly?
So from fast forward, now we're talking about Rasputin and sort of secrets, mind control machine. How did you leap into that? I mean,
Rasputin's Chateau is my sixth book, and it's the fourth time I've brought back. Riley,
the agent,
who we met in, who was never meant to be a serious character. Okay. You know, we met him in The Last Templar. He was really there to serve as the story. The story was my star, and Riley was just the character, one of four characters.
Your foil.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed being with him again. And I thought it was such a personal story for Riley that I felt it should be written in the first person. So I changed to me becoming Riley, and Rasputin's Shadow takes one strand from the Devil's Elixir and explores it on its own.
You use a lot of history in your books, and in relation with the fiction, you know, it's got to be a tremendous side of your writing process, which is about research. Is that you spend a lot of time going to library or traveling, going to locations? Do you do all that stuff?
I travel, but the internet now is just such an amazing tool, as long as you know how to filter out. Yeah. The internet can also help connect you to the right people. When I was writing The Sign, I was trying to devise this kind of thing that appears in the sky that no one can explain. So is it God, is it aliens? And it's neither in the book. But I was looking into NASA on the internet, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I found that the guy running it was originally Lebanese. So I called up, turns out he'd read the books, he'd loved them, he connected me with some of his top scientists. And so the internet was an entree to actually me speaking face to face with all these incredible guys.
At the end of the day, why do you think you're right?
Because I love telling stories. My first screenplay was about a guy who's unhappy at his job. He'd get on a plane, and he was bored being in business class, reading the Wall Street Journal with all these guys in suits around him, and it wasn't him. So he used to start a conversation with the person next to him and get the person's business card. And on his next flight, he would impersonate that person, the card that he took. And it ends up changing his life. He gets the girl, he's happy, leaves his job and finds his true self. And I wrote that when I was working at the bank, where I didn't like my life. And I remember I had to apply for this Fulbright competition under an assumed name, under a friend's name, because I wasn't eligible for it. I didn't have the British passport. John Cleese of Monty Python, he was championing this award. He was the head of the jury. So I was nominated for the award. I go into this room with John Cleese and these four Fulbright directors, and I've got a name tag in front of me, which is not me. The application is, everything about it is fake, same as the guy in my story. And John Cleese, throughout this 1 hour interview, he says, at the end, he says, I think there's a lot of you in that character you've written. And I said, more than you'll ever know. So for me, that beginning of writing was a way of kind of escaping the life I didn't like it is kind of an escape from reality.
So Haunted deals with, we talk about serial killer and your research in the field.
You know, I actually came at it from being intrigued by the profiling part of it, the FBI part of it, and the idea that someone in law enforcement could look at a crime scene that they didn't really have any suspects or they didn't have good forensic evidence and still say, you know, this is the kind of person who did this. And then from that, I got interested in who is the kind of person who does this and what's the person's psychological makeup and what are the different options there.
Did you have access to the FBI file? They let you in and they just share the information?
Well, I've talked to some people who are current and former federal agents before writing the book, and I did have someone in the FBI read the manuscript to make sure that it was accurate, and so correct things. Like in my original version, I had my character shoot at a fleeing car, and the agent said, no, we're not allowed to do that. If you're not in danger or someone else is in danger, you don't fire at all. So stuff like little things like that, to get right.
You're talking about profiling. Are they like traits that are common for all the serial killers through time? Do you know, have you been looking into that as well?
There are some types that they can break them up into. I mean, obviously everyone is, just like every person is different. Every serial killer is different too, but there's, they break them up into organized or disorganized. Serial killers fit into certain categories. So I did do a lot of research into that.
I often hear from crime writers who write about serial killers that the psychological trauma is already part of the individual, the environment pull the trigger.
I do think that there's something to be said for social isolation, not living in a community and not having that accountability and responsibility and knowing people around you. I do think that that's bred more serial killers. I mean, the FBI has a database for highway serial killers because there's so many of them who troll for transient victims, people who might not be quickly missed, and so they're easier victims. So
who are your victims in your book?
Wives, mothers, women who don't expect that they're being targeted at all, and the serial killer is targeting for them for a very particular reason, and my profiler actually initially has trouble figuring out what that is. In this particular book, women are found buried up to their heads in the woods in Virginia, and the press dubs this guy the Bakersville Barrier. He's from the town Bakersville. And so she tries to figure out who this guy is and why he's targeting these women. And in the process of doing so, she catches his attention. He sees her, and then it becomes a game of cat and mouse, and she discovers that getting inside the minds of a serial killer can be just as deadly as going after them, knocking on their door.
Why did you write this sort of book?
I love the mental puzzle that goes into a suspense. Both as a reader and as a writer, I like seeding in the information that hopefully at the end of the book, a reader will come back and say, oh, now I get it, that little piece that they kind of read over in the beginning. And as a reader, I like that too. I like trying to figure out, is this a red herring? Is this the guy who did it? Having justice at the end of the book and giving people kind of not only that escape of just the fun of reading a book, but also that feeling that when you close the book that something good has happened and it's ended up positive. And I like that.
But I kind of feel like you're avoiding my question. I was asking more personal. What are you gaining from that? From writing that?
I do have some personal stuff that's happened to me that I think has probably led me to shape me and made me interested in what makes people work, what makes people turn out to be good or bad, and how two people who grow up in maybe the same household, one can turn out evil and one can turn out good, and how that works.
And what do you think it is when we make those choices, aware or not, but makes people become a killer and you become the president or whatever, or a crime writer?
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question that's never going to be truly answered, like that age-old question of genetics versus environment. And I find it fascinating, so I like to write about it.
And some people will say, like even some people take the wrong path, they are a victim of their own circumstances and they need to be helped. So.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for being on Books du Jour. And this is Elizabeth Heiter from Detroit, who was about haunted and serial killers. We start with a very unappealing premise for me because I have children, and when the children disappear, somehow it does something to me. But you seem to be okay with that premise. So how did you come up with that?
It's not that I'm okay with it. I mean, it's a very interesting point you're making, because when I pitched Ruin Falls to my publisher, right away we said the kids were going to have to be safe, the reader would know the kids are safe, and the mom would know her kids were safe. What she wouldn't know is whether she could do what it takes to get them back.
So the inception of the story, how did it happen?
This story, Ruin Falls in particular, happened when we were on the road. Not Carlos. We got upgraded to a suite. This is a nice thing when you live in a car because it's bigger, you can spread. Sure. Go to tuck the kids into the sleeper sofa, and I noticed that in a suite, the kids sleep near the exit door, and the parents are a whole room away. And I knew I was going to write a novel where the mother stumbles out of that room.
Just like that.
Just like that. Pulls back the covers, no kids to be found. But I also knew that she was going to find those kids and that was going to be the meat of the story. What did she have to dig down and find so that she could become a mother who righted her world again, got her children back?
So basically the novel becomes sort of a journey's hero. One have to find oneself and hidden resources.
Yes, that's a great description. You should come on tour with us.
I should, yeah. What's your background?
It took me 13 years to get published.
13 years?
13 years. Cover of Snow is the 8th novel I wrote, even though it's the first published.
Okay.
And before that, I practiced as a psychotherapist for a decade.
So you're a CSW?
I actually have everything but the dissertation in psychology. So I can't be a psychologist because I never did that ornery dissertation.
Are we talking PhD?
But I have everything except for the PhD.
So can you practice or not?
You can practice. You have to practice in an exempt setting. So I could not I can't do therapy like this.
Okay.
But I worked in a hospital for 10 years.
So I get it. Well, you're very quick to come back. Boom, boom. Probably putting me in the boxes saying this because of that.
No, there's no boxes. You're all outside boxes.
Okay, good.
That's good psychotherapy.
Free.
Right.
So why crime?
I'm fascinated by ordinary lives thrown into complete upheaval. So I would call these psychological thrillers, even more than crime novels. Although you're right that there is a crime usually. I'm just very interested in how a person can overcome, and that's why I say there's a balancing in the scales of justice, because by the end, whatever crime took place, somebody's going to be punished for it.
But do you set up to write that message in your novel, or is it an inevitable conclusion that we all want the...
It's not a message. It's a feeling of liberation and catharsis that comes when, yes, life doesn't hand us a lot of closure, and
no, it doesn't.
I'm a huge...
So why do it in novels?
Because I go there to find a world that has more justice, and it's not that everything's tied up with a bow, because it's not. In fact, I've had readers complain, why didn't you tell us what happened with these two or these, and I don't. But it's more that if there are going to be harrowing events, you reacted right away, kids disappearing. Well, there better be a good reason for it, and it better end in a way that, yes, I want to feel satisfied at the end of a book.
What did you find about yourself through the process? What did you find out?
And that I could only hope to be as brave as some of the women in my books. Some people have asked me, do you feel like you are them, or they are you, or you are they? And I say that, I hope so. I find that there's a bravery inside all of us if we can reach down and find it. I
always believe the nature of drama is people reveal themselves in drama or conflict.
Exactly. Conflict.
We could have an argument to be very different people.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Jenny Milchman, thank you for being with us on Books du Jour. Ruin Falls came out a month ago, you said?
Yeah, a couple of months ago.
So it's a very captivating novel. Right, so
thank
I
you.
would just go and grab it. Thank you for being on Books du Jour.
Thank you for having me.
Right. We're still at Thriller Fest, and my next guest is Carla Norton, and the book is The Age of Normal. The story behind it, it's not as good looking as the cover. And, how did you tread upon that story? It's a story of a sex slave, correct?
The protagonist is a survivor of kidnapping and captivity.
That's right.
And this is my first fiction, but it's inspired by my first nonfiction, which was a true story.
That's right.
Perfect Victim was the first book. That was about the victim.
Okay.
This is about a 22-year-old survivor of kidnapping and captivity who is called upon to help another victim of kidnapping and finds herself in a harrowing cat-and-mouse chase with a dangerous predator.
Why are you interested in that topic?
True confession, I was a hitchhiker when I was a young, stupid college student.
In America or in Europe?
In America. I hitchhiked the same stretch of freeway that the victim in Perfect Victim hitchhiked. When I heard about it, I was working in Tokyo for the Japanese edition of Reader's Digest, and the newspaper started to carry the story about this woman who was kidnapped while hitchhiking, and the dateline was Red Bluff, California, which is very close to where I grew up. So I was just fascinated. I came back to cover the trial and write the book. So I had been writing true crime, and it's funny because people would say, "How can you write that stuff? It's so grisly."
Yes, I was going to ask you, can you write that stuff? You look charming, you must be a very dark person.
Well, it does give you nightmares. And
it does? I mean, for real?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. If you're doing a good job, it gives you nightmares.
Because you're too close to the story? It's just
because
it's
real. Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to live with the crime while you're writing the book.
Yeah.
Actually, when the J.C. DeGard case came out, you might remember that, a young woman who was kidnapped, and again in California, held for 18 years. I just thought, I have to write something about a survivor of kidnapping and captivity, and The Edge of Normal came out of that.
Mm-hmm. So how much research did you have to do for this book?
Well, a fair amount of research. I was really grateful for the people that gave me their time and attention. I drew upon, actually, some of the research that I did for the trial when I wrote Perfect Victim. Dr. Chris Hatcher was the forensic psychiatrist who testified. I have a character who's a forensic psychiatrist in the book. He was the inspiration for Dr. Lerner. Then also I've spent some time in courtrooms, so there's one fellow who's a reporter. So in a way, these characters are all, facets of those crimes, and then you do some research for the locations. I've got a thinly veiled location, which is Jefferson County, and anyone who lives in Northern California knows it.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what it is, but
that's the part of California that wants to secede and become its own
independent state.
Yes.
So you've been to court. What sort of defense does aggressor, perpetrator do? They claim insanity? What's the most common defense?
Claiming insanity is very difficult because you have to prove that you're at the point that you can't control your own affairs.
So the age of normal, what's abnormal about it? The crime itself?
The protagonist, who's a 22-year-old survivor of kidnapping and captivity, her name is Reeve, and she's on the path to normalcy. She's trying to regain a normal life. And her psychiatrist, who's an expert on captivity syndromes, is called upon to help another young girl whose family then wants to talk to her, and she becomes drawn into this crime. She doesn't realize when she goes up there to Jefferson that the predator is still out there, and he starts tracking her down. So it's a crime novel in which a damaged, flawed individual has to draw upon her inner resources, and then she finds she has a fiery sense of justice.
Well, we wish you all the best. The Age of Normal, Carla Norton, and it's a first crime novel, correct?
Yes, and it's up for a Thriller Award.
It's a Thriller Award tomorrow night. Well, wish you all the best. I hope you get it. Thank you for being on Books du Jour.
My pleasure.
My guest, a friend of mine. Are we friends, by the way?
We are friends.
Well, maybe we're not. Maybe not for the next 10 minutes. And then Jacobson, new book, new publisher, Spectrum. Yes. It's a Karen Vail story,
It's
right?
a Karen Vail FBI profiling.
Six, okay.
Six in the series. I take Karen Vail back to the very beginning. Her first day on the job as an NYPD patrol officer. She encounters a murder. She doesn't know what she's seeing. It's her first day on the job as a cop. That case, that killer will follow her through her career all the way through the present as an FBI profiler.
Yeah, so the book has a very long timeline. It starts in the early 70s, I believe, right?
Correct. And there's another storyline to it that, as you mentioned, starts in the 70s, early 70s, involving a Greek immigrant family in Queens. And, I grew up in Queens, so for me, this was back to my roots in more ways than one, not just for Karen Vail, but for me
Jacobson is very Greek, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a very Greek name, yes.
Okay, yeah. The fact you felt like she has to crack this case that has been plaguing her all her life, what's so important to write about that?
It gave me an opportunity to go back and explore Karen Vail in a way that I'd never done. I approach each book, whether it's a Karen Vail novel or one of my standalones, as a fresh project. I try not to do what I've done before. So maybe it's the way I tell the story, the setting, the challenges that Karen Vail faces. And this gave me an opportunity to go back and explore her as a character before she was the confident FBI profiler that she is today. To revisit her and see her as an individual who did not know really what she was doing on the job. And what does she know? She went to the academy and, now she's out on the street looking at this really strange murder that even the seasoned detectives are going, wow, this is really strange, this is bizarre.
So she's getting older, right?
Yeah.
How is she evolving? Is she evolving like you are evolving, or she's more fluid, or she's becoming, you want to keep her pretty much the same age, consistent throughout?
I didn't need to follow a book a year in her timeline. It never was a consideration, never was a problem. And Spectrum certainly presented a little bit of a challenge because I brought together all aspects of things that we didn't know about in her past and things that we do know about from the novels in the Vail series. It was a lot of fun to write.
So what is Spectrum?
It has multiple meanings. Okay. One I can't tell you.
But don't tell me.
Because I don't want to ruin the story. But the other one is certainly a spectrum of life and a spectrum of a career.
Okay.
And I came up with the title before I started writing, which happens often, not all the time, and it was just the perfect title for this book.
I know you do a great deal of research. What was the most challenging aspect on that book? The 9/11 stuff?
I was born and raised in New York. 9/11 was very, very difficult for me. I spent an inordinate amount of time researching 9/11. I looked at the timeline. I could tell you back when I was writing it what happened every minute, almost to the second. My editor actually didn't want me to do it. He felt it's too painful a thing to revisit, and I said, you know what? I feel like I need to do it. We can always strike it if you feel it. When he read the manuscript, he said, I'm so glad you did it. He said, it's perfect. I would not change a word. And so Karen Vail does experience 9/11, and we experience it along with her because we see things through Karen Vail's eyes as we do in all of the Vail novels.
Alan Jacobson was my guest today on Books du Jour. We are at Thriller Fest, and the new book, Spectrum, early October. Fantastic Karen Vail's novel, and wish you all the best with that. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I think we're living in a world where there's no time to do anything, so we don't even have time to die. It's basically what it's about, right?
Not exactly.
Not quite. Okay.
So No Time to Die was inspired by a real-life story I heard about a young woman who actually completely stopped aging when she was a toddler. This is a real story. This poor girl ended up living about 20 years just as a toddler, and no one could figure out why. It just started a spark in my mind, like, what if you couldn't age? And what if your DNA held the key to the genetic fountain of youth?
Dream of every woman in the world, right?
Right, but not aging is also kind of a curse.
Of course.
Especially if you're stuck at a horrible age like 14 years old.
Okay, so it's not a Faustian story, is it? You have to sell your soul to the devil or for redemptions?
No, it's not like that. It's actually a very realistic story with a protagonist who's a young woman who's actually stopped aging at 14, but she's in reality 21. She gets caught up in a huge unfolding drama because people realize when her story comes to light that she may hold this very crucial DNA.
In her body, in her cells?
Yeah, in her cells that could lead to the unlocking the mystery of why we age and die.
Okay. So some people are after her.
Some people are after her, right.
The writing process for you has been pretty fast because 2 years ago we met, you had a novel.
Right.
It had a big ethical component to it.
That's right.
This one seems also, it has a sort of a duality again. And I know from your background you're very interested in bioethics.
I am.
So you have to be so intense in your story choices when you write books, or it's just
something
something
that
comes.
Makes it more fun.
Well, for you, okay. So tell us why you like that.
I like very challenging moral dilemmas. I think as a writer, that just gets my brain going and gets me thinking of all the possibilities and all the high stakes that different people have invested in this central issue. So I think that's the prime recipe for a really good thriller, because you want to have a lot of danger, a lot at stake, and people with great emotional investments in the outcome.
But you could do that through a fiction novel, right?
Well, it's not as exciting.
Okay.
You've got to have some murders in there, come on.
Through the history of the world, when there's discovery, there's always an intention, and the application is always different. It's like the nuclear bomb, for example, So are you concerned also the application that the gene could be misused in to destroy life or create illnesses or viruses or et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, of course. That's a major downside of introducing new synthetic organisms, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
So how much research do you have to do to write a book like 100,000 words-ish, and it deals with the bioethics and the medical conditions? Do you have to investigate talk to a lot of doctors and see if it's possible? You have DNA, can you do this? Can you create, can you go use sequencing of the computer for the genes?
I would not have been able to write this book if I had not connected with one of the chief scientists behind the genetics of aging today, who was generous enough with his time to go over my whole premise and what could fictionally happen to my character. He happens to be the head researcher of the real-life girl who stopped aging. We developed a sort of professional correspondence where he helped me figure out all the science in the book. So it's all based on what he said.
Did you have to do some testing as well?
I didn't, no.
So you're not 85.
My DNA is not special.
You're not 85 years old and pretend you look that way.
Some people think I'm like still 12, but I promise I'm not.
Thank you for being on Books du Jour.
Kira
Peikoff, No Time to Die, and hopefully one day no one will have time to die. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.